Everyone, thank you for joining. We'll get started in a minute or two, just letting others fill in.
On June 25th, 2022, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was signed into law following the Robb Elementary School tragedy in my hometown of Uvalde, Texas. Now, part of this bill sets aside billions of dollars to make American schools safer. That's money to pay for mental health resources and security for safer schools to ensure that our kids can learn in peace and without fear. Problem is, not enough school districts that need these grants know how to apply for them. And for those that do, there's a complex and expensive process. But now we have a solution. The Green Lights Grant Initiative. It will get the word out that this money is there for schools that want and need it. Two, it will help school administrators apply for these grants by letting them know when the deadlines are, what the grants pay for, and how to apply. We're even going to provide professional grant writing services, all at no cost to schools. That's right. It's free. When Camilla and I went to Uvalde, the parents and the family members of the children that were killed asked for one thing: make their lives matter. Let's make sure that the first bill passed in 28 years to help protect all of our children in schools matters. Learn how your district can get help applying for school safety grants at greenlightsgrantinitiative.org. On June.
Hi, everyone. My name is Omer Ramil. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out of your busy schedules. I'm an advisor to the Green Lights Grant Initiative that was founded by Camilla and Matthew McConaughey. They understood after the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was passed that it's really difficult for school districts in particular to apply for and secure federal school safety and mental health dollars. Even though the dollars are out there, it's hard to get your hands on them. So we put together the Green Lights Grant Initiative to try to be a support system to help you get the resources that you need. We know the federal grant application system is confusing and complex, and you never know when grants will come out or when they're due. And so we're trying to help you through that process. Matthew and Camilla are really excited that you're joining us and that you're part of this effort to ensure that America's students are safe, healthy, and secure. We all know that everyone has a role to play. And so with that, I'd like to share a brief message that Matthew McConaughey recorded for you all.
Hello, everybody. Matthew McConaughey here with the Green Lights Grant Initiative. I want to welcome you to the Getting Ready for Grants webinar. It's an overview of federal grants and what's needed to apply. Now, our goal here is to help connect your district to federal grant dollars to help keep your students safe and healthy. This is the first webinar of many by the Green Lights Grant Initiative, and we hope that you will join us for every one of them. Today, you will be introduced to key concepts and resources to increase your understanding of readiness for and competitiveness for federal grant funding. Thank you for joining. And in the meantime, and all times, just keep ready.
For a bit more background on what we've been up to in the past year, we've been able to support more than 2,000 school administrators with grantsmanship training and help districts nationwide submit dozens of quality grant applications, resulting in more than $2.5 million in mental health and school security funding making their way to districts. We're able to forge unique partnerships with universities like Arizona State and New York University, who provided pro bono grant writing services at no cost to schools in their state. And we're looking to build that out even further. As we look forward, we're leading into a pretty major grant cycle coming this spring. So it's our goal now is to get as many districts as possible ready to apply for these federal school safety grants. So what we'll be providing is webinars like this that offer in-depth grantsmanship training, cohort learning opportunities for sort of a smaller group feel, one-on-one grant writer support, and we'll continue to expand your university partnerships. So please, we'll provide our contact info in our chat, and please reach out if you have any questions about our programming. I know it's great hearing from a grant writer for me about the grants process, but I think nothing's better than hearing from a superintendent herself who recently went through it. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Lori Barron of Evergreen School District in Kalispell, Montana. She has an illustrious background in education and recently went through the process to apply for the 2024 Department of Justice BJA Stop School Violence Prevention Program grant. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Omri. It's exciting to be here to share with all of you. And I've got to start by saying thank you to AASA, the School Superintendents Association. Without them, we would have never known about the Green Lights Grant Initiative. And so very grateful for that connection. And then once we were connected to Green Lights, it made a significant difference in our ability to apply for a grant. We applied for and were able to receive a grant writer through the initiative, through Green Lights Grant Initiative. And that grant writer worked very carefully with us, along with Tori is on the call here. And I probably owe Tori more than anybody. I don't know that we would have applied or finished the process without Tori. Unfortunately, the process for our district was extremely difficult. And I hope that's not the process for everyone else, but I wanted to share a little bit with you about some of our challenges and what happened to us, and then maybe give you some tips so that you don't have to go through what we went through to get through this process. We found out in February that we were going to be able to work with Green Lights Grant Initiative, and we were awarded a grant writer, which was fantastic. We spent a couple of months working on that grant and getting it ready for submission. Tori was involved in all of that. We had a grant writer. And then the challenge for us came in when we were ready to submit in the middle of May. We were done, we had everything ready, and we were really proud of our application and what we had developed to represent our school district and our need for funding to promote healthy and safe schools. We were not able to submit our application. It was extremely difficult to get online and navigate the platforms where you actually submit the application. And while writing the application did take some time, that was just getting through the process and understanding what we were asking for and making sure we had the data. And again, we had Green Lights Grant Initiative supporting us with a grant writer, which was fantastic. But once we went to apply, we couldn't get logged in. They could not find our school district. We're in our 121st year of continuous operation, but they could not find our school district. It took us 2 weeks just to find out the real name of our district. We were on 5 different platforms. Probably in that 2 weeks, made close to 20 phone calls, had 10 different logged incidences requesting help, but it kept sending us back and forth to different platforms. Lots of time on hold, lots of phone calls, lots of frustration, lots of notarized documents that we had to send in and wait for a response. It wasn't until over a month later that we were finally able to open the portal and submit our grant. And I have said to so many people, had it not been for Tori and had it not been for Green Lights Grant Initiative, we would have quit the process. We would have never been able to see it to the end. It was just too hard, too challenging. And not that any individual in our district couldn't have had the skill set to do that. We don't have that kind of time. We are a small rural district in Northwest Montana. We have 650 students, 3 schools, and we don't have a grant writer. We don't have that kind of staff to see something like that through. And without that external support, we would have never completed the grant process. And so I can't say thank you enough. If you have not already gotten yourself involved with Green Lights Grant Initiative, obviously you're here today, and so that's a first step. I really encourage you to attend all of these webinars, sign up for the help they provide. I mentioned to Omri yesterday, we're still waiting to hear if we got the grant, and we are very, very hopeful. It's disappointing that that money is sitting there and not out in schools right now, but we're still hopeful and hope we will have the opportunity to have that grant. But even if we don't get it, I am very grateful we went through this process. I learned so much about the grant writing process, the technicalities, the platforms, that I will say it was a very good use of my time and our district's time, even if we are not successful applicants. We will now have the skill set and the tools to apply for future grants and sustain that knowledge when we don't have support from an outside entity. And so the biggest win for us in developing that relationship with Greenlight's Grant Initiative is now understanding where to find the grants, which grants are appropriate, how to apply for them, how to submit them, how to get through all the platforms. And so again, I'm still very hopeful that we're successful, but I would still say my time working on this and the time that our district has invested in it was worth every minute and will make us more prepared to apply for future grants, even if they're not in a federal grant program. So we're more prepared now than we ever were to seek additional funding to support the mental and physical health and safety needs of our students. I do have a couple of tips for you I want to share so that hopefully you don't have to do what we had to do, which was pretty painstaking. And my very first tip before you do anything is make sure you can get in the portal. That was the most frustrating part. You have to have certain logins in different portals to be able to access and prove that you are the administrator of the organization and that you have authority to apply for that grant. And then you have to actually go to the portals and open the grant. That part was the most painstaking and stressful for us and took us over a month to do. Had I known, looking back, I would have done that first, because we kept pushing up on the deadline and we were fearful that with all the time and effort our grant writer had spent with us through Greenlights, that Tori had spent with us, that our district had spent, that it was going to become all for nothing because we weren't going to be able to submit in the time frame due to the blocks that kept coming up inside the different access portals. So my first tip to you is make sure you know how to access and you have authority and that you can actually get into the grants and submit them. A next big thing that was super helpful for us and that we'll use even in future grant writing is to have all of your data ready. What data do you have that proves you need this funding? That was a big help for us. We had a lot of data already ready and we're able to share that with our grant writer, and our grant writer communicated to us that that made the process much easier on her end. Remember, these grant writers don't know our schools. They don't know our data. We've got to be prepared whether we're writing it ourselves or we have assistance from an organization like Greenlight's Grant Initiative to have the data to prove we have the need. While I hate that these grants are competitive, the reality is they are, and we need to work with what we've got, and we are competing for funding all of us need. And so having your data that proves you need the funding for whatever it is you're asking for is critical, which is my next tip. Know what your ask is, right? Know what you want. You've got to know, I need this program, I need this curriculum, I need these staff, I need this opportunity, and you got to know how much that costs. When you're going in and asking for federal funding, you've got to put a dollar sign to every single thing you're asking for. And so it's critical that you know what you want before you get in there, and then you have the data to support what you want. A lot of these grants are high dollars, and obviously we need to be very accountable when we're asking for those. And so having that knowledge before you go in and just think, oh, I'd like money, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, will make this process a lot more challenging. The next thing I would recommend, whether you're using Greenlights or not, you need somebody to partner with you. I'm a writer. I do a lot of our grants. This is the first grant I didn't do myself for our district, and I still need assistance. I never submit any kind of document or grant without someone editing it for me. Having those outside eyes, because we're writing about what we know about every single day, we sometimes leave out critical information that an objective scorer of the grant might not know. And so it's critical to partner with someone. Greenlight Grants was that partner for us, and it really helped us to be more objective and to make sure we were very clear in our narratives, in our abstracts, our goals, our budget. Having someone to partner with to walk through that was critical. And another piece I want to recommend, and I wish I had started this earlier in the process, and if I'm try to do a federal grant again, I will, is be prepared to get good quality recommendations. Those take time, and you're relying on other people outside of your organization for partnerships. You know, we were able to secure a lot of really solid recommendations, but those take time when you're working with businesses and community members and civic organizations and faith-based groups and legislative representatives. And so really making sure you're prepared ahead of time to have those partnerships with people that will speak for your district and their willingness to work with you to support improving healthy and safe schools for kids. And that's what all of our communities want. Every person I asked for a recommendation was thrilled to help support that effort. But getting those takes time because everyone has schedules and they're busy. And so I know this was super quick. I cannot reiterate how grateful we are to AASA and Greenlights Grant Initiative. And again, my 5 recommendations for you: make sure you can access that portal. Make sure you have all your data together. You know what your ask is going to be. You have someone to help you, to support you, to edit, to check your work. And you're working on who are those quality recommendations going to be. We're still waiting and we hope to hear soon, but we're very, very grateful. And again, even if we don't get the grant, this process was so educational for us and will help us continue to seek other outside funding in future days and months ahead. I know that was quick, Omri. Anything else I can add?
Lori, that was excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time. And we're all crossing our fingers for that grant notice.
Yeah.
Moving on next, I just want to flag that these slides will be sent out once this webinar concludes. So I recommend taking notes if you want to, but be sure that you also have them in your inbox. And if you're not yet registered on the Greenlights Grant Initiative portal, which is where you'll get information about small group cohorts and grant writing assistance, please go to our website at greenlightsgrantinitiative.org and sign up. And you'll be able to get notified when grants become available and opportunities arise. We are at the whims of the federal government, but we're doing our best to make sure you have rapid notification and everything you need to submit a quality application. And the people who are doing that are folks like Tori Foster, who's the Managing Director of Grants and Federal Affairs at McAllister and Quinn. And some of you may know her, but she's been an incredible asset to the Greenlights Grant Initiative, and she'll be leading us in this webinar. So take it away, Tori.
Thank you so much, Omri, and thank you so much to Lori for sharing your experience with us and our audience today. It's incredible to be able to hear that this experience has been so helpful for you, whether or not we get the grant, and hopefully that'll just improve future applications. So thank you again for sharing your experience with us today. So hi, everyone. My name is Tori Foster, and I'm going to be your facilitator today. I work with McAllister and Quinn, which is a partner of the Greenlight Grants Initiative in delivering both project management and grant writing services for the school districts that are participating in our program. I have been working with McAllister and Quinn since 2017 and delivering comprehensive project management services for various grant-seeking entities, and of course worked with the Greenlight Grants Initiative for our inaugural year and helping secure some grant writing services directly to school districts, as well as other supportive services and trainings. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and thank you again for joining us. So what we are going to cover today, so Lori actually made so many excellent points and tips that we're going to cover today. One being the general overview of the federal grants landscape, what's going on. We all know that there is an election coming up and that things may change, but we're going to kind of go over the overview of how it is now, how it has been historically, and how the future may look a little bit. As well as getting started. General information on how to register and apply for federal grants. We're definitely going to be covering those portals that can be quite frustrating, particularly those that are applicable to all grant agencies, regardless of where you're applying to. We're also going to cover tips for writing a competitive federal grant application. We do have another webinar that I will reference called the Federal Grant Writing 101 webinar that we have put on in the past and will reference as well. That one will go a little bit more into the actual writing process as well as the structure of applications. So we're going to do a broader and more high-level overview here today. And then additional resources, again, pointing to some of the other resources that the Greenlight Grants Initiative has been able to produce over our initial inaugural year, other trainings that we've put on, as well as handouts, memos, templates, and those types of things that can help other school districts that may be applying independently or in partnership with us. So again, just to do kind of a broad overview of the impetus for this whole Greenlight Grants Initiative, we all know in the wake of the Robb Elementary tragedy, Congress did put approximately $3.6 billion towards community violence intervention and grants discretionary funding as a result of the signing of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This particular legislation did put significant discretionary funding into grants that support security upgrades, mental health services, and other programming that will make schools safer. And some of those grants were available through both the state and federal levels for school districts, state educational agencies, and nonprofits through the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Education. And we will kind of do a high-level overview of what exactly those programs were, with a focus on the ones that we have found that our schools tend to be the most competitive for and eligible for. So some of those available school safety grants that we wanted to emphasize are primarily out of the Department of Justice. And those were the grants that received increased discretionary funding spread across state crisis intervention programs. One of those key programs where we put a lot of resources into this year was the BJA Stop School Violence Competitive Program. And this is a program that has been around for many years and is quite broad out of the Department of Justice, in that it is really willing to fund a broad range of activities that ultimately improve student outcomes and prevent violence in schools. So that can consist of training in violence prevention, training in mental health best practices such as mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, training for staff. It can pay for staffing itself for key violence prevention, mental health supports, mental health staff. It can also be used for equipment such as anonymous reporting systems. It can be used for operating threat assessment teams, as well as other broad interventions that ultimately reduce school violence and reduce violence within schools. So that is a program where a lot of our schools see themselves as a fit. A lot of schools are eligible. There's quite a significant amount of funding that tends to go for this program year after year. It is an annual program, and it is one that we tend to recommend quite highly. Another key program where a lot of resources go into is the COPS Office School Violence Prevention Program. This is almost a counterpart to that Stop School Violence program out of the BJA. However, this program specifically focuses on physical security upgrades that ultimately improve safety and hardening measures for schools. So this is where you're looking at equipment such as security cameras. This is deterrent measures. This is communication systems, crisis systems, visitor management systems, key fobs, fencing, those types of things that ultimately improve the physical safety of schools. And this is another opportunity that has consistent funding annually, and that we anticipate seeing quite a few awards and continued funding into, and one that you will see kind of continuously emphasized throughout a lot of our Greenlight Grants Initiative programming. Some of the other school safety grants that came out of also received additional funding include the OJJDP, Enhancing School Capacity to Address Youth Violence. This is a more community level intervention strategy and all about increasing school safety through development and expansion of violence prevention and reduction programs and strategies at more of a broader partnership level. So this is where you're looking to partner with additional community-based organizations, perhaps health organizations, working with your law enforcement. This is kind of a broader opportunity than the others. Some of the other school safety grants also came out of the Department of Education, more geared towards direct staffing of mental health service professionals and school-based mental health service professionals as well. The one I would like to emphasize here is the school-based mental health service grant, and this was specifically a recruitment and retention mechanism for increasing credentialed mental health service providers within schools who are serving high needs LEAs. So this is one where they provided incentives, various incentives to recruit those who may be, areas that perhaps rural areas or other areas where there's significant need and a lack of meeting those state level ratios for school-based mental health personnel. And this is to really get those personnel in the door and retain the personnel that you already have. Now, in terms of actually getting started, so As Lori had already mentioned, the registration process, if you're not already familiar with it, can be quite a hassle. So that is why we always recommend that this is something that you do early. You do not have to have an active federal award to initiate those registration procedures. The ones that are required for all grants include the SAM.gov, also known as the System for Award Management, and the grants.gov grant portal. And these are, we're going to go a little bit more in depth in this, but these are your two most key grant portal registrations that you're going to want to have well ahead of any grant competition cycle. And as for agency specific, we do have the Department of Justice portal, just grants noted here for as well, just given the concentration of school districts that are going to want to pursue those opportunities. All right, getting started as far as registering with SAM.gov. So again, this stands for the System for Award Management, and this is the official website of the US government. And this is what they use to publish and manage federal contracting opportunities. SAM.gov is one of the registrations that can present a significant challenge for many districts due to various reasons. The good news is that most districts already have an existing SAM.gov registration. Whether that's SAM.gov is something that you kind of need if you're receiving any federal dollars, pass through any type of funding from the government, whether directly or indirectly, you probably have an existing SAM.gov. The issue is when it comes to keeping track of it. A lot of our small school districts experience turnover. Sometimes, we lose track of the existing logins, passwords. Sometimes people leave and don't quite replace the system administrator that is on file. And unfortunately, you can experience some difficulties in verifying your identity when you're trying to get back into the system. So just an example of some common issues is that just not being aware of if you already have an existing organizational login. Again, most districts will already have a login, but sometimes locating that can be a challenge just due to turnover, loss of credentials for various reasons. And this can cause SAM.gov to put you through a sometimes lengthy verification process to give in order to give you access to your credentials, which can involve, as Lori had mentioned earlier, can involve getting notarized letters, organizational bank statements. In extreme cases, you might have to bring in a local representative to try and just get things moving a little quicker. And to really avoid all of this, is just all we can emphasize is really start early. And this is something that we'll also provide you guys with a handout with at the end of this presentation and send out later on to help you through this process. Something else about SAM.gov that you should really keep in mind is that you want to ensure that once you are in that system, it's going to ask you to assign a system administrator. You want to make sure that if you have an existing SAM.gov account, that system administrator is up to date and accessible. And your best practice is to have multiple persons assigned with system administrator capabilities to ensure backup access in the case of someone just being out, unavailable, or having an emergency. You really want multiple people to be able to access this system. And you also want to have an established process for ensuring that all of your passwords and registrations are available to those who need to access them. Another issue with SAM.gov is that it does require renewal every 12 months to ensure active status ahead of time. So another reason to just continuously check your SAM.gov, make sure your registration is not expiring anytime soon. And SAM.gov is unfortunately one of the only login registrations that can take up to 6 weeks as far as waiting periods. Most of the other agency portals or grants.gov are pretty instant as far as being able to register. But another reason to just apply early or start early with your SAM.gov registration is that this is one that can take up to 6 weeks to receive just your initial registration. Our second most key registration, but a little bit less of a hassle than SAM.gov, is your grants.gov registration. It's a much more straightforward process, thankfully. However, it does require your SAM.gov registration to be completed first, because what you're going to get out of SAM.gov that you're going to need is the UEI number, also known as your unique entity identifier. And that is something that you're going to need to be able to create an organizational account on grants.gov that will enable you to apply for grants successfully. And you're going to follow those same best practices, making sure that your authorized organizational representative, as they call it in grants.gov, is also your system administrator, but also making sure that you have more than one person who is assigned those capabilities in your portal to be able to successfully submit and upload grants on the organization's behalf. And again, this will be present on the handout that we're going to give you and walk you through being able to successfully register for these grants. Something else to keep in mind that a lot of these government portals do have multi-factor authentication enabled. So grants.gov, I believe, makes you change your password every 30 days. You often have to choose a sign-in method where it may send you a text message, or it may send you verification codes and able to be able to access your individual account. So just some things to take into account as you are coming up with your own best practices and sharing practices for passwords within your school district. One last tip is just when in doubt, ensure that you utilize the help desk. In those handouts, you'll see the help desk phone numbers for both grants.gov and sam.gov. And they are really great at being able to walk potential applicants, anyone having any issues with the registration process. They will walk you through it, and they can sometimes do some rejiggering on their side to help you successfully get in that registration system. All right, so how to identify federal grants. A lot of it is really utilizing those resources we just shared with you. Grants.gov is kind of the key place to check for agency forecasts, notice of funding announcements, really being able to see what's coming down the line. You can also check for previous notice of funding announcements to see when they were last released, as well as retrieve various documents related to those grants. You can also search by keywords, awardees, eligibility, and those types of things, and filter to your needs. There's also an option to sign up for email alerts. And you can tailor filtering to your needs based on eligibility and other criteria. Other things include agency forecasts. So oftentimes directly on agency sites, you are able to sign up directly for news alerts via the agency websites. And finally, utilize us. We really encourage you to send in your information via our Contact Us form to be added to our mailing list for tailored funding announcements and relevant updates. So in identifying opportunities, you really want to keep in mind agency goals. So again, the agencies we're kind of concentrating on, just for the sake of the school safety funding, are the Department of Education, as well as the Department of Justice. And the Department of Agency, the focus is really to help local education agencies and nonprofits in partnering with schools to improve student outcomes through various means. A lot of those means include mental health supports, academic supports, really kind of based on the notice of funding opportunity, but those are the general things that we have seen. School safety in the name of really improving students' abilities to succeed within schools. The Department of Justice, a bit of a broader range of activities, but again, the prevention of school violence, assisting students, helping students feel safe within their schools will ultimately improve their academic and behavioral outcomes as well. The things to look for in seeing what makes a good fit grant is just at the very base criteria is your eligibility. The most obvious is your organization eligible. For the school safety grants, school districts will typically be eligible, including independent school districts and private schools. However, individuals are not eligible, just something to keep in mind. You want to look for the number of awards. For the most part, the grants that we have flagged have a significant number of awards, which increases the chances of being awarded and has a higher probability. And sometimes there's not. We're kind of at the whims of government funding and seeing what those numbers are going to look like for the next year. But we are hopeful for increases or at least level funding for many of these programs that are annual. Some other tips to keep in mind in looking at good fit grants are you able to review previous awards and proposals, see who was funded in the past, funding amounts, is it worth your time? Is this going to really help pay for things that are critical to your school districts? And does it fulfill your budget needs? And then again, geographic distribution and priorities, you want to really carefully review the notice of funding opportunity, ensure that you are the target audience for this opportunity, or you have the data that can show and demonstrate whether or not your needs are really in alignment with those of the agency and what their agency is looking to fund. And again, you want to really consider your alignment with the strategic plan and the programs of the organization with those of the agency. Does your data show a specific need that aligns with agency priorities? Do the preference priorities align with the organization's target population or mission? For example, some notices of funding will specifically target rural communities or communities that are within opportunity zones, low-income communities, special population, and those types of things. Take those into consideration as well. And activities that you're looking to fund, you really want to make sure that those costs are allowable. So pay attention to unallowable costs and allowable costs to ensure that alignment as well. All right, as far as in an ideal timeline, typically agencies will grant 45 to 60 days for grant competitions. Here at the Greenlight Grants Initiative, we really do our best to try and get ahead of the funding announcements based on historical data. We typically look at previous years and estimations of when a competition might typically come out and work to do our best to work ahead and start developing at least a concept based on the previous year's funding announcement. So we really want to get ahead of it and develop a concept, review the concepts. This is also really important, particularly for school districts, because sometimes there can be layers of bureaucracy and you want to get your teams formed ahead of time and start passing ideas back and forth, start to consider, are you going to have to bring in others? Again, as Lori had mentioned, really being able to have that collaboration of a partner or collaboration of just an outside entity to review your proposal, someone to copy edit, just provide a fresh set of eyes to your ideas and ensure that everyone starting from the top, from the top down is really involved and willing to kind of put in the work and making sure that this is going to be a successful and cohesive application. Now, I won't go too in-depth in the planning, just being cognizant of our time, and we actually have already put on a webinar that you can review called Federal Grant Writing 101 that goes more into the specifics of the writing process, the structure of a proposal, how to carefully read a notice of funding announcement. You can find that on our website. But again, just kind of a high-level overview is the planning. Start 2 to 3 months out from the deadline if you can. Review any publicly previous or past or current solicitations or notice of funding announcements. Identifying your team early, are you going to require additional signatures? Is the superintendent going to have to be involved? Who's the budget person who's going to be helping? Are you going to need an additional person to help secure partnerships? Are you going to have to involve law enforcement or other community-based partners? These are all things that you really want to start early in the thinking about it as part of the planning process. The writing itself, again, I recommend viewing our Federal Grant Writing 101 webinar, but really ensuring that you are writing to the review criteria that was going to be laid out within the notice of funding opportunity or solicitation. You want to write directly to agency goals and the objectives in the solicitation, not what you want to fund. And what we mean by that is that schools have a lot of needs, and sometimes not all of your needs can be fulfilled under a single funding announcement. So you really want to put your needs in the context of what the governmental agency is seeking and ensuring that those are in alignment. So while you may not be able to carve out the entire pie, you might be able to carve out a portion of that pie based on the agency goals for that specific solicitation. And it's important to just make it as easy for the reviewers as possible by using the application's language itself. So if they have subheadings, use their subheadings. If they're asking or using specific terms, use those terms. You want to follow any guidelines, formatting, use any provided templates in the application, and you only want to provide what is asked for. I know it can be tempting to sometimes, more to sometimes just it can be tempting to kind of provide more than what is asked for, essentially. But we really recommend just answering the question exactly. They often want your answers to be concise, and they want your answers to be backed by data. That is the most important. And again, the review process. Really make an effort to have someone review your drafts intermittently. Really having someone review your budget as well to make sure that it aligns with your drafts or your narrative. You really want to make sure that everything is in alignment, because you can, receive points off if they're not in alignment. You want to make sure that there are no surprises in your budget for the reviewers or for anyone within your school district. And you want to make sure that you're reviewing attachments and all of those things. And making sure that you are using the scoring criteria that is always embedded within a notice of funding opportunity as you are writing, to ensure that you are hitting all of those compliance points and making sure you're hitting exactly what they are asking for. And then the submitting process, assuming you have all of your portals, your registrations in order, that is just something that you will then upload and submit depending on the agency. And again, best practice, make sure that there is a backup person within the organization or school district who also has the login capability to submit, because sometimes emergencies happen, sometimes folks are unavailable, and you really want to make sure that you will be able to submit your grant. And again, submit early, always. We always try to submit at least a couple days early in the event that there are any technical difficulties with the portal, which does sometimes happen. So after you submit, agencies typically can have anywhere from a 4 to 6 month reviewing period. So you may not hear back right away. There's typically, there's typically a 4 to 6 month waiting period. And while you're waiting, there isn't a whole lot that you can do other than just keep checking your emails. Sometimes you may hear questions from the agency about your application. Sometimes they may ask you to fill out additional attachments and forms, which can be a good sign that someone is interested in funding your application, but it is a bit of a waiting game in the intermediate. And all is not lost if you are declined. Declination is part of grant writing, unfortunately. These grants are typically have significantly more demand than funding available for the grant program itself. Not everyone will be funded the first time, and that is okay. The agencies will give you back feedback that you can actually use to reapply in the next round. And given a lot of these grants are annual, you can put it back on the conveyor belt, make those changes that are suggested by your reviewers, and submit a stronger application in the next competition cycle. And then as far as sometimes agencies, this is a bit on a case-by-case basis, but sometimes agencies will be open to having a call with potential applicants to go over their reviewer comments. That's something that you will want to work out with your assigned program officer, who is the person that will contact you about your application or whether it was funded or not funded. And you can potentially have a conversation, if amenable, on how to best improve your application. And again, if you get those comments back, we recommend that you go ahead and resubmit. All right, as far as just other available resources, again, in our inaugural year, we did put on a host of free and tailored resources for potential applicants, including other webinars, memos, one-pagers, and FAQs, and other helpful tools. As you will receive this PowerPoint slide deck, all of these are hyperlinked for you, and you can find them directly on the Greenlight Grants Initiative website itself. Various webinars that we've put on, including getting ready, how to make your case for data, Federal Grant Writing 101, understanding logic models, and how to build a grant budget, some existing webinars that are already in our library, as well as a host of memos that are specific to some of those other school safety grants that we have identified earlier in this presentation. So certainly encourage you, again, sign up through our Contact Us list. Please take a look at those resources. All of this is at your, please use all of this to go ahead and prepare for the upcoming competition cycle. And certainly, please feel free to keep in touch with us or send us an email. Any questions, we are happy to answer those as well. So we have about 15 minutes left for Q&A. So we're happy to go ahead and answer some of those questions now.
Hi, Tori. I just want to remind everybody to keep sending in questions into the Q&A function so that way we can ask our panelists. First question I have for you is, isn't it also helpful to have templates available for grant recommendations? And then she commented that many of CBOs request them.
Yes, and by recommendations, do you mean like, I'm assuming you mean by letters of commitment or letters of support, and certainly it certainly helps speed the process up oftentimes to have templates available, and those are things that we can provide as well. But we do often find it to be a best practice in kind of loosely filling out a template for those potential partners and getting them to it. It can help with it can really help with getting past the bureaucracy and getting your letter signed a little faster to get those templates in. And sometimes a notice of funding opportunity will provide you with a template, and sometimes you'll just have to create the template yourself and share that with your potential partner.
Wonderful, thank you. While we answer a few more questions, do you mind going back to the last slide with the additional resources? Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Second question is, you mentioned having a sam.gov account first in order to apply in grants.gov because you need a specific code. What was that?
Sure, that's going to be your unique entity identifier, which is generated upon completing your registration within sam.gov.
Wonderful. Another question here. Can you speak with a program officer during the planning phase of a project to see if the basic idea of the grant is aligned with what readers and decision makers are looking for?
So the answer is sometimes. It is case by case, depending on the agency. Some agencies are friendlier than others. And it also depends on the program officer capacity at that time. I think it never hurts to send an email and ask, but just a word of caution is that oftentimes once a grant competition is active, they will not be doing those types of calls with applicants. But if it's before a competition is active, they may be open to it.
Could you also talk about what types of data school districts should start to collect for grants?
Absolutely. So again, I just want to point back to our How to Make Your Case with Data webinar that was recorded on October 30th of last year. It goes more in depth in this, and I believe there's an accompanying handout. But some of that basic data that you're going to want to start with includes your demographic data, any school safety assessments that you may have had done. A lot of school districts will have a youth risk behavioral survey that talks more so about the mental health supports, are students feeling safe, parental input, surveys, those types of things. And it also can depend on the type of school you are. Something I hear a lot is that sometimes a school will seem better off on paper than they actually are, such as schools that may be in more affluent zip codes technically, but a lot of their students actually come from more disadvantaged zip codes. You want to find that more localized data to really make that case in need of where those students are coming from and why, why you have a need for the grant. So, you want different forms of data, quantitative, qualitative. Sometimes it can be anecdotal if there are no other options as well. But again, various databases, public databases, sometimes law enforcement will have a public database on safety. Your county will also, a lot of county websites often have publicly available statistics. Sometimes hospitals will do needs assessments, neighborhood assessments, or other community-based organizations will do their own assessments as well. It just kind of depends on the area, but those are some different avenues that can be a start.
Thank you. How can school districts demonstrate a compelling need through their data?
Yeah. So, it's really seeing what your data says. Again, oftentimes your youth risk behavioral survey or Other state mandated surveys will often tell you what you need. So if students are not feeling safe, if your data shows that a lot of students are answering that they don't feel safe, then obviously you're going to be looking for either physical safety improvements or mental health improvements that will ultimately contribute to a greater sense of safety within your school district. So it really just kind of depends on what the data is showing you and if that need is in alignment with what the NOFO is asking for.
Wonderful. I'm not seeing any more. Oh, just had a new question come in. Do many of the grants you've referenced today have similar process windows, and is there a specific grant season?
Sure, so there's no specific grant season per se. Again, we are at the whims of the federal government. So sometimes when the budget is late, a program might be late in being dropped, or funding may change. But as far as a lot of the grants that we've identified here, a lot of them are kind of in that March to June window as far as when they come out. A lot of them are Department of Justice specific. So we anticipate that heavy grants period will probably begin late spring.
Wonderful. Can you talk about how to request a Freedom of Information Act, otherwise known as a FOIA, for previously awarded proposals, and how that might be a useful tool for school districts?
Sure. So oftentimes agency websites or subdirectorates of agency websites will actually have a Freedom of Information Act request portal or link, and you can actually go there and directly indicate your credentials. And you can request specific applications that you may be interested on, which you can look up based on previously funded award announcements that are usually within a database on the website. Or you can just ask for a proposal of a similar size school if you're keeping it a little bit more open-ended. But most agency websites will have a request form or something similar on their websites that you can use to request. And through those FOIA those FOIA proposals, you'll be able to kind of see what a winning proposal looks like, what best practices they may have used. It's really used as a tool to just kind of see what the formula is like, what the logic model may have looked like, those types of things, to just understand if that's something that may align with what you're looking for.
Great, thank you so much. I'm not seeing any, not seeing any more questions come in the chat. So if anybody has any last minute questions, now would be the time to send them in. Just got one. Can an educational support agency apply for grants on behalf of their school districts?
It depends on if you're a nonprofit or not. I know sometimes school districts will have something with a different designation that represents multiple school districts, but usually it's a nonprofit designation, or it's a designation of either the state or a public entity. And in those cases, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, yes, but if it's a for-profit entity, it cannot. Or at least in most cases cannot.
And then what would be a FOIA model?
I'm not sure I understand the FOIA model.
I think we'll just wait and see if we get some clarification on the question. But in the meantime, can you talk about the difference between supplementing and supplanting funds?
Sure. So something, again, I really recommend looking at our How to Build a Budget webinar that was put on December 5th of last year. Goes a lot more in depth on budgeting and supplanting versus supplementing. But supplanting is the act of using federal funds to replace existing operational funds that are already designated for a specific line item. Grant funding is meant to supplement. So it cannot, you cannot take money out of something that already has funds allocated for it and then use the grant to replace it. you don't want to do that, but you can add other you can use grant funding to, hire additional staff or for additional training or something like that as a supplement to perhaps existing operations or programs.
Wonderful. Okay. I think we have some follow-up on our previous question about a FOIA model. The attendee said, you mentioned that you could review best practices in a grant, and I believe you could look at a FOIA. So maybe just some clarification on what a FOIA is and how can looking at a FOIA be helpful when applying for these grants?
Sure. So you can FOIA various things, but a great way to just see an example of what other organizations or school districts who may be similar to you have done to secure a grant, or what their program structure looks like. Those are kind of the most helpful reasons for why you would request a previously funded application through the Freedom of Information Act. Viewing previously funded opportunities, or previously funded applications, that allows you to see what their narrative was, what their logic model was, what curriculum maybe they have used, what potentially what the budget looks like, what exactly were they using the funds to pay for, what evidence-based practices were they using or asking for training for. It can help you see those levels of specifics, which can be really helpful, particularly for perhaps districts that are less familiar with writing grants on their own, or just less familiar with the process in general.
Thank you. I appreciate you answering all of our questions, Tori. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat, and given that we have 2 minutes of our time left, I think we can go ahead and start to wrap things up.
Thank you everyone so much for joining. Please reach out at info@greenlightsgrantinitiative.org if you have any additional questions or feedback. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be in touch soon about the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.